Hello? Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming and welcome. Today we're going to be discussing capacity building and implementation of the Paris Agreement. And to implement the Paris Agreement, the world is going to need a whole new generation of professionals dedicated to measuring, reducing, and verifying emission reductions. And greenhouse gas accounting and inventories are still an enormous challenge to many countries. And fully implementing the transparency framework of the Paris Agreement will require a massive increase in the amount of professionals with greenhouse gas accounting skills. Greenhouse gas inventories, the biennial reports, and monitoring and implementation, all of these things take really good people who can measure greenhouse gases. And most people, countries, states, and cities use the Ipcc Guidelines. It's their sort of Bible of sorts for greenhouse gas accounting. And we know that many countries, despite decades of capacity building, still face real challenges in terms of implementing the Paris Agreement in this regard. So today, we're going to be hearing a little bit about this and transparency and capacity, and be questioning if there is a larger role for academic institutions to play in supporting government needs for greenhouse gas accounting. So I also want to note that today we're going to have sort of an active side event. This is not going to be your typical just sit back and get spoken to and have like a couple question and answers at the end. So up front, I wanted to note that we have some pens and paper over here to do sort of like a fishbowl question thing. We'll do some questions at the end in a standard way as well, but if you'd like, at any point, please feel free to stand up and write down a question for the speaker that we can answer later. And we're going to hear from a number of individuals today that work in the academic space. And so what we know and what studies have found is that people learn best through interactive learning. So we're going to practice that right now. So in terms of ground rules, to respect everyone's time, I'll be keeping time and making sure that we get to hear all the awesome ideas coming from our panel, from the variety and diversity of speakers that we have here, and as well from the audience. So before we jump in, I just wanted to note that our great partner Rizaldi couldn't be here due to travel timing, but we have a wonderfully excellent panel prepared for you today. We've got John with the Carbon Institute, Gao Jingpin with the Academy of Forest Inventory and Planning, Joseph with the Ministry of Forests from the Republic of Congo, and a nationally designated entity to the CN, and Eri Sakawa, who's a professor at Emory University with the Department of Environmental Studies and the Roland School of Public Health, as well as Naomi Vanderburgh, who's a master's student at the Wageningen University in the Netherlands and is representing IFSCA. So with that, we're going to get started, and I'm going to put the first one to John O. So let's hear from John O.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for coming. Thanks, Catherine, for the introduction. So as Catherine mentioned, I work for the Carbon Institute, which is a partnership managed by the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about these two institutions. And also, as Catherine mentioned, we're definitely going to hear from the panelists and hopefully from the audience about probably the biggest challenge for implementing the Paris Agreement. And in my view, the biggest challenge, now that we have the Paris Agreement coming into force, is whether every country can develop its own professional workforce of people that can measure, report, and verify inventories and emission reductions. So the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute has been doing training for 10 years. We're celebrating our 10th year anniversary this Wednesday. So if you're going to be here, we're going to have a cocktail party down at the Che Guevara bar, which is a little bit appropriate because Che was a revolutionary. And I would propose a little bit revolutionary that when the Paris Agreement comes into force, we have just as many greenhouse gas accountants as we have financial accountants. And I really do think that that's the type of future workforce that we're going to need to get to 1.5 or 2 degrees. The key thing to remember with all of what we're going to talk about today and with the Paris Agreement at large is that it is a soft agreement. It's one of the largest pieces of consensus in human history. And to get all the countries to agree to bind themselves to the Paris Agreement, there wasn't going to be very strong enforcement or the United Nations police coming in and telling countries what to do and fining them or punishing them if they didn't meet their commitment. So as a soft agreement, it's really built on countries doing inventories, looking at what types of mitigation and adaptation they can do, making national contributions or pledges, then implementing those pledges over time, and seeing where the world is in terms of emissions. And at each one of those steps, there's a greenhouse gas accounting component. So that's why we focused today's panel on building that capacity for the greenhouse gas inventories and accounting. So we've trained over 3,000 people worldwide. We do trainings for the expert review teams of the Secretariat. We have dozens of courses that range from general courses on what are the Ipcc guidelines and how do you use them, to very specific courses on how to account for methane coming out of landfills, or how to account for different sectors, whether it's industry, agriculture, or forestry. And what we've learned is that there are good courses and there's not so good courses. So today's presentation is really how do you take international standards and customize them for national circumstances. And what we mean by that are what have we learned as international standards for good teaching? So we know, for instance, that, as Catherine mentioned, there's a lot of research that says if you're going to do courses, online courses or in-person courses, having active learning where people are engaged in the discussions and engaged in managing data is far more effective at teaching than just having a lecturer stand up and try and give information. We've also learned over the course of years of education and studying education that it's really important to state learning objectives up front and then manage the courses against those learning objectives. So that at the end of the course, whether it's an online course or a one-week course or a PhD course, you can actually test whether students have met those learning objectives. So this is what we mean by international best practices. And today we're going to hear quite a few stories about how international standards for teaching get used in different national circumstances. The other thing that we've learned from the 10 years of working on greenhouse gas accounting capacity building is that online courses are simply not enough. To do inventories and to develop national communications, it's really important to have students suffer, to sit in a room and to beat their heads with GIS, or to beat their heads up on the Ipcc guidelines. So how many people in here have used the Ipcc guidelines? Can you raise your hand if you've used them in your work? So maybe 25%. If you add up the 2006 guidelines and you stack them up on top of each other, they're about this thick. So it takes a lot of work to understand how the standards, the Ipcc guidelines are built and how countries should use them for their inventories and for their reporting. So the Carbon Institute tries to pick up where the online courses leave off. And we've been very lucky to have support from the German government and previously from the US State Department to do work in China, which Gao Jinping will talk about, and Indonesia and the Republic of Congo. And what we're doing, the Carbon Institute is doing, is a much deeper dive where you can use online courses, but then we work with academics in particular countries so that faculties in universities develop professional certificate programs on greenhouse gas accounting. And these are typically 2 to 4 week long certificate courses. They try to be very comprehensive, from understanding the policy context, the Paris Agreement and national laws, to also understanding how to use the guidelines, understanding emission factors and activity data, as well as statistics. And another real important part of the work that we do with the Carbon Institute is making sure that professionals who take these certificate programs can also communicate the results of their inventories in a way that policymakers can use. So the Carbon Institute, as you're going to hear, really focuses on the land use sector. And the reason we focus on the land use sector is because as you look at the global carbon cycle, land use dominates the uncertainty. And if you have a country that's reporting its emissions, and its land use emissions have this huge uncertainty band, essentially that is wiggle room for governments. So the more uncertainty that there are in inventories and the more uncertainty that there is when they report their actual emissions, that actually is flexibility for governments. If you're plus or minus 20% on your estimates, then you can be 20% over your target and still say, well, we could be meeting our target. So that's why the Carbon Institute has really focused on helping universities around the world build world-class faculties on the agriculture and forestry part of the carbon emissions. So I want to end with just a couple points that we've learned in how the partnerships that that you'll hear a little bit more about, some of the principles that we use and why we think they've been successful. The first thing is when we engage in countries, we always make sure that the national governments and their universities agree to work together to build these certificate programs. So in China and Indonesia and the Republic of Congo, the very first step of how we engage is to make sure government actually wants their universities to build training programs and they're willing to pay for them over time. And we also make sure that universities are willing to change so that instead of just teaching theoretical courses about ecology or theoretical courses about the global carbon cycle, that they're actually doing applied training for governments who are trying to meet the requirements of the Paris Agreement or help guide mitigation efforts. So that's point one, is we get right up front governments and universities agreeing they're going to work together. Number two is we recognize that in every country there's been a lot of capacity building, and there's already great teachers in China, in Congo, in Indonesia. Any country you go to, there's already some good academics who are working on the inventories. And so we want to just make sure that they've got everything they can to be better and to help their governments over the long term meet the requirements of the Paris Agreement. So we try not to sort of do the old model of sweeping in and pretending we know everything. The very first step we do is we look at what universities and what faculty are already doing great work. And then we ask governments, or we work with our partners to ask governments, what else is needed? So are you struggling with statistics? Or are you struggling with a particular sector when you work on your Paris Agreement accounting? And then we simply design professional certificates, building off of the good faculty in these countries that then serve government's needs, and government agrees to pay for these courses. And that's really critical because capacity building for 15 years has not done a great job. And a lot of that is because consultants will fly in and do a workshop and post some materials online, and then they leave. And we found that it's much more important to really think about building capacity for 10 and 20 years, not just for a workshop. So that's one of the other key principles we've learned. Just a couple more. The other thing that's been really important for the work that we've done and the people that we've trained, for the training that we do for the Secretariat, is we make sure that it's comprehensive. And by comprehensive, I mean when professionals go through these certificate programs, they need to understand the Paris Agreement requirements. They need to understand their national laws. So China, when they do their forest inventory, there's a lot of people working at the provincial level, and all of this gets added up into a national forest inventory and a national carbon inventory. So we try to help the people at the provincial level and the local level understand the international reporting requirements. We also have a very strong focus on the Ipcc guidelines. That is international best practices, as Kat mentioned. So then when you look at the guidelines, we really focus on the emission factors and how to develop good emission factors, make sure these emission factors go through peer review and get submitted to the emission factor database. And finally, we want to make sure that all of this good information is not just an exercise in being nerdy. We want it to actually influence policy and to guide mitigation. So we make sure all the certificate courses we help foster around the world also let the practitioners become good communicators. So that's a big part of what we do. And most importantly, as you're going to hear, all the certificates that we run and all the capacity building that we run is nationally owned, and they tailor it to their own circumstances. And with that, I think I'll turn it back to Kat and to the next speaker. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jono. So keeping with our group commitment, I just wanted to see if we got one or two rapid fire questions right now from the audience, if anybody has them, and if not, that's fine, but we're gonna keep this discussion open and going as we go along if you guys have questions that pop up. So if anybody does have questions right now for Jono, please feel free to come up to the mic. We also do have our cute little fishbowl questions on paper here if you'd rather write them silently. Awesome. With that, we're gonna go on to Gao Jingping from the Academy of Forest Inventory and Planning.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here to share our TCA IAP's practice in China. My topic is about development of business proposal of accredited training of TCA in China. Firstly, I will introduce Academy of Forest Inventory and Planning briefly. AFIP was founded in 1950. I'm sorry. First, I'll introduce AFIP briefly. AFIP was founded in 1959. It is engaged in forest monitoring and planning, forest information system, involved in forests, wetland desertification, wildlife and plants, and so on. It has worked for terrestrial carbon accounting for many years, and the following slides, I'll introduce two typical cases. This is the first one. China has set up forest carbon accounting and monitoring system since 2009. It has built more than 16,000 plots to estimate the carbon stock for LULUCF, land use change, and forests. The second case is, China will launch terrestrial ecosystem carbon inventory satellites. This satellite is very important for China to estimate forest carbon. It is the first LiDAR satellite to observe forest height biolines in China. It will play a very important role in forest carbon to climate change. This is our team family. From the photo, you can see we have a very young and very special family group. They are very effective. This is the overview of our key work. Just now you see our group family. The next 4 things I'll introduce one by one. First, in China, we have 3 agencies to cooperate the certificate program. FCAMC, Forest Carbon Accounting and Monitoring Center, will organize and manage the training sections. CFEA, it's in charge of management of the forest inventory planning and designing certification in China. STFA will support TCA training courses. It will provide teaching and accommodation facilities. This is our goal. Is very important. Firstly, through investigation, we'll try to master China's TCA's needs, gaps, and opportunities. Then, we'll try to build high-quality, comprehensive courses tailored to China's circumstances. Then, through training, we enhance our country's carbon accounting capacity at national and provincial levels. Then, at last, with the GHG Management Institute's help and their experience, we try to build, develop, and run our national tailored TCA certificates using our best practices, our well-trained teachers, and carefully practices courses. This is our goal. To meet our goal, we carried out the scoping study for 2 parts. One is baseline, 2 is gaps. From the scoping study, we found the TCA certificate courses are not so popular in China's institutes. But all the interviewees agreed China should train TCA certificates for the technicians for future TCA accounting and monitoring. This is our curriculum plan. This is the key. Firstly, about the courses, we'll finish preliminary courses development before the end of 2018. Then I'll finish all the courses before May 2018. About the teaching time, totally 80 hours. Include 45 on-time hours and 35 face-to-face training time. About the training section, we'll Part 2. The first training section will complete it by August 2018, and the final training section will end by December 2019, we have thought a lot about the curriculum content. The following two slides showed our face-to-face plans. One is about science and policy contents. We'll teach global climate change processes, international climate negotiation, and forest response, and development of international and national carbon markets. About AFIP guidelines, we'll teach the AFIP LULUCF, IEDD, and the forest carbon markets. And we will teach 3 TCA methodologies in China. About GIS and RS, we'll teach new technologies such as RS, GIS, and other new technologies, UAV, Internet of Things, Big Data, and teach them how to do in forest survey and monitoring. About field method, we'll teach the important forest inventory method in China, and some very important inventory and investigation how China developed and carried out. There are statistics and R courses. We'll teach the statistics method and R language. Then, about the communication course, we'll teach the national report and the project level report, how to report. These are work photos. You can see from the photos, we have do a lot with our partners in the 2 years. Next, we'll emphasis on our courses developing and running with our partners, other partners. That's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to see those photos of your work and your colleagues. It was lovely to get a glimpse into that. Do we have any rapid fire questions for that lovely presentation on what's going on in China? All right. With that, we're going to move on to Joseph with the Ministry of Forestry in the Republic of Congo, as well as he is the nationally designated entity to the CTCN.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I'm not very happy with English, but I will try to express myself. I came from the Francophone country, so you can imagine my effort. Okay, thank you. I don't have a PowerPoint, but I will try to share some information with you. If any question, I will try to go deeper. Okay, I'm not a scientist. But I've just got a chance to coordinate many projects in Congo. One of them, obviously, is national communication. And I work with researchers, they love me, and scientists. Most of them are involved in forestry inventories, forestry projects, because maybe because I'm one of the team of the cabinet in the Ministry of Forestry. So in Congo, Congo is when I talk about Congo, just to give you one information that we are from the smallest one, because there are 2 Congos, not the biggest one. You say Congo Brazzaville, so just to make you have a support on the country I'm talking about. So in Congo, the country is almost covered with forest. More than 80% of the country is forest. So we just have cut some trees to build some cities. But so for now, the rate of deforestation is not that huge, but it's huge enough. It's 2%, but it's too much for now. it means that our aim is not to cut our trees in order to enforce our development, but we want to preserve our forest, because it's, of course, the forest is based in Congo, but it's not our asset. It's our common asset. Because if we do badly in Congo, we won't be the only one to suffer. You will suffer. Everybody will suffer in the world. So our duty is to do a lot, not a few, a lot to preserve what we have. And I'm happy because our policy have brought some good results. We are one of the best country in the world in preservation. And the rate of reforestation is growing very fast by now, because, okay, we are a country covered by forest, but we have some region where there is a big threat. People are in shortage of charcoal, for example, or how do you call it? Biomass for cooking. You know, they have to go very far to find some piece of food for cooking. It can seem unbelievable, but that's true. This means that we have to replant, not very far from the cities, maybe not with the natural species, but with species with which can grow very easily. So the potential of reforestation is still there. The size of our forest is preserved. Okay, but maybe we need to cut trees if we want our forest to keep huge ability of mitigation. So we have to do. We cannot leave all the forest with nothing. But we cannot touch all the forest because, for example, I will talk about it later, but there is a very huge superficie which is cover peatlands. So it's a surface forest which grown in almost water. So you cannot easily access that area. It means that God says that, okay, you can cut trees everywhere, not here. Because I can go maybe by feet, but I'm not sure I can bear a big piece of tree. So when I said that we are one of the best in preservation in the world, it means that we have made a lot effort in, for example, most of them in the right process. Also in certification, we have huge surfaces which are certified. It's, I think the size of the certified forest is bigger than two or three times Belgium. So if Belgian people are here, you are all certified. Okay, so to do what? Okay, another element, more important thing is that most of our data and inventory have been done just to comply with international requirements. You know, most of them was first. We have two national communication, and in this specific project we made a lot, and also with the red plus we made a lot. But for now we haven't done any inventory for our own use, because we didn't see the importance of that. Everything has been done for the other, because we have to comply with international rules, with international commitment. But now, when we talk, for example, now we're coming to Paris Agreement, now it's a need of transparency of action, transparency of support. Now we'll have to make inventory for our own use. Why should we do that? Because we have to know what is the rate of emissions we have. What can we do to lower, to mitigate? We used to say that, okay, why we African countries should we make effort to reduce our emission when we do not emit anything? I think, okay, it's not because it's not, now it's getting warm. Maybe thanks for me. Yes, I think we have to think about tomorrow. We have to think about the future. Saying that, I would like to say that our plan now, okay, we know we are good in preservation. Okay, we know we are not the huge emitter. But the problem is, for example, from in 2014, Congo has only one cement factory, and this year we have 5 cement factory. So the problem is, in 2014, we could say, okay, our capability of providing energy to the cement was enough. Now we are running out of power. And what we do now, we are importing coal from South Africa. So in our third national communication, the amount of emission in the industrial sector will be maybe huge, one of the most important in our history. Okay, shall we say that, okay, anyway, we have the big forest, so we can pollute in this part? No, I don't think that, from my perspective, we don't have to think like that way. We have to reduce anyway. Our production have to be cleaner. We are willing to develop our country, our industry. We have to follow the same rule. It's why measuring our domestic emission is very important. It will give us a picture of where we are, where we are going, using which mean. Saying that, I don't want to tell you that our ability in research is very important. We have done many things, many works in research. John was in Congo. He have met with talented people, very close, smart. Not me. I'm taking for the other. They are able to do the job. They are using the most modern method, but of course, it's obvious that in Congo, like in many countries, in the developing countries, the problem is the lack of resources to empower institutes, university, and laboratories. But people are there. For example, me, I'm very happy because only this year, I've sent 4 young ladies, 22 years and 26. The 4 young ladies were trained in Ipcc tools. One went in South Africa for Ipcc software, and the other were trained in Cameroon. 3 are involved in inventory in the forestry sector, and 1 is working on the crop sector, in the agriculture sector. That young ladies, when they see them, they look like, okay, they are going to the party. But here, I'm very happy. Yeah, because, usually people do things that, so tell me if still have to. Okay, yeah. No, because in Africa, girls or women are not involved in research. They are. And I'm very happy because, okay, I did that. That's not enough for now, but it's just a start. They will be like model. They will, yes, okay. Like I will try to benchmark something, so many others can say, okay, oh, there is a good opportunity for me in research, because first I can travel, I will learn modern things, and I will meet with other people, because it's challenging to be in the place where, okay, I'm the only one, I'm not young, I'm a researcher. Okay, just forget about who you are a lady, you are young. No, now you are in front of a computer. You have to deliver a good job. you have to learn because, okay, someone is waiting for you back to Congo. Because when they come, they had to report to me what they did. And they had to tell me what is the use of what they have learned. And why I've sent these young ladies to in many training programs, because I need them for the first natural communication. And all the project we have to do about inventories, they have to be involved in. Our researchers are getting older, and we have to replace, not to replace people. I don't want to kill them, but we have to renew the team. And I think that partnering with the Carbon Institute or GHGMI Management Institute will be one of the key things we can offer to our researchers. So university, we have many people very interested in what they are willing to do. Climate change is not like a new thing for like the fair. Okay, I acknowledge that we are not doing a lot to make people be aware about climate change in Congo especially, but if we bring more knowledge, more skills to young people, they will be our most important actor in the society and in the university. So I think I'm done. Yeah, okay.
Joseph,
Yes.
I just want to ask a quick question. So sorry to interrupt. It was so interesting I'm glad you brought in the point of women and young people and national communications. It got me thinking about reports and the fact that UNEP has just released its newest emissions gap report. And I know that you spoke about having lots of open space for afforestation and reforestation. And in the UNEP report, it was discussed that there is still the ability to make our stated emission, like our stated temperature reduction target, but that it's going to take not just rapid decarbonization, but also negative emissions, and that land use change in forestry is one way that can be done. So I'm wondering if you might be able to speak to a little bit to that.
If I start speaking about that, yeah, I need maybe more than half an hour. So
Perfect.
just ask me a very specific question. I will try to respond. Thank you for speaking. Yes.
I guess my question would be what your thoughts are on negative emissions with land use change in forestry for meeting temperature targets stated in the Paris Agreement.
Do you think I can give you a good answer about that? No, that's not. I'm not very confident with such a specific question, but I can say that what we are doing now is to gain the ability to be able to respond to any demand coming from domestic need or compliance. Maybe I have to maybe it's like an information. We are one of the owner of the biggest peatland in the world. Instead of being a source of emission, we can absorb now more than 30 gigatons of carbon emitted in the world. So instead of being the polluter, researchers discovered one of the peatland, which is the size of that peatland, it's 145,000 square kilometers, bigger than UK. So what you have to do is, so now we don't have any knowledge how to preserve that peatland. We don't know. Maybe people from researchers from all over the world can do that, but we don't have the ability to do that. We need to set up programs which can allow us to have a group of researchers working with the other to preserve altogether this our common asset. So if we talk about negative emission, I think we are minus 30 giga.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yes,
That's
so minus. So
potential.
yes, we have even 100th century we can pollute with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All
You
right.
see how polite she is. Instead of saying, hey, stop. You say, no. Thank you.
And with that, we're going to go on to Eri Sakawa, professor at Emory University, Department of Environmental Studies in the Roland School of Public Health.
Good evening, everybody, and I would like to thank for the invitation to speak today. So I'm not sure how many of you are aware of Emory University, but we are a research university in Atlanta, Georgia, and then we've been sending delegations since 2015, so this is the third time that we are here. And I'm very happy to talk about the collaboration going on at Emory on climate change and air quality as well. So I think what is probably most relevant for this workshop is the current Emory-Nanjing partnership that we are creating. Emory has a very long history with Nanjing University, but last year we started the new partnership with Nanjing University, especially focused on air quality and climate change mitigation.
You should tell them it's in China. They may not know it's in China.
Oh, so I'm told that Nanjing, so Nanjing is in China, in case you're not aware. And so CO2, in terms of CO2, 90% of global uncertainty in CO2 emissions comes from China. And so what my group is very interested in is to figure out where this differences in inventory comes from. And we are trying to partner with Nanjing University and also with Tsinghua University and others at IASA to see if we can actually come to where the difference might be. So we've been looking at activity data together, we've been looking at the emission factors so that we can hopefully reduce this global uncertainty. Another thing that we are also trying to do with Nanjing University is to look at climate smart agriculture. We all know that agriculture is very important for emissions, and we really don't know how much is coming from. I'm also very interested in nitrous oxide emissions. And so what we are trying to figure out is how different agricultural techniques lead to emissions and potentially emissions reduction by using different techniques. So that's what we started. We've been doing the experiments at the University of Georgia for 2 years now, and we just started the experiment in Nanjing University last summer, and we are hoping to continue that. And we are also having the partnership in Ethiopia and Brazil so that we can see how different places would have different emissions from the same potential agricultural techniques, and to figure out if we can actually reduce the nitrogen fertilizer use and the pesticides use and what's going to happen to the emissions. And we're also not just looking at the greenhouse gas emissions, CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide, but we're also very curious about what's happening to the carbon sequestration, obviously. So that's what we're trying to go for, to really look at the international best practices and how we can draw that from the educational, institutional perspective. So as I mentioned, we are sending the delegates for 3 years in a row. I think what's also important in terms of the classes might be how we can communicate climate change. And so that's what we've been focusing in our class. So I have the faculty collaborator, Sheila Teft here, and then several of my students are here. And what we do is to really think about if multimedia, for example, podcast, video, or infographics, could we use those means to really talk to the public? Is that a better way to think about how we can communicate the science if we are failing pretty badly about communication? I think we are kind of running out of time, so I don't want to keep you too long on my talk, but I wanted to, at the end, mention about the side event that we are doing. So we are having, with the University of Colorado Boulder, Moderators Beyond Borders, and International Center for Climate Change and Development, we are actually having a very, very similar side event titled Role of Universities in Implementing Article 11 of the Paris Agreement. That's going to be next Thursday in room 10. At 11:30 a.m. So we are hoping to talk about the U.S. role, but also how the developed countries and developing country partners, the universities, could actually come together to have better collaboration, not just one-time workshop, just like you were mentioning, but actually from the students' perspective and also the faculty perspectives. And for the MRE Nanjing, we're thinking about the virtual center as well. So I'm very interested in if anybody has had such a collaboration before and what would be useful to have a meaningful collaboration between the developed and developing countries for capacity building. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Ari. That was really great. And last but definitely not least, we're going to hear from Naomi Vanderburgh, who's a master's student at the Wageningen University in the Netherlands, and she represents IFSA, the International Forestry Student Association.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to speak. So here I'm here on behalf of IFSA. It's indeed the International Forestry Student Association. We are a nonprofit organization consisting of over 10,000 people involved, dispersed over 46 countries in the world. We are all associated with an educational institution that teaches forestry. And through our network, IFSA encourages student meetings, enables participation in scientific debates, and supports the involvement of youth, especially youth, in decision-making processes in international forest and environmental policy. So one of the things that we organize is the International Forestry Student Symposium, in which we talk about the most up-to-date status quo of the academic community when it comes to forest science. And it's really all about the exchange of knowledge. So transparency is one of our guiding principles, and we also firmly believe that, especially in terms of carbon accounting, this is very important. We greatly value the importance of calculating the rates of carbon emissions and, of course, sequestration, because we're talking about forest here. So it's really important to us that we understand this essential that this is essential in multilateral negotiations about greenhouse gas emissions and, of course, carbon trading. There's a huge need for a scientifically robust measurement system and predictions about the volume of static as well as moving carbon. So most of us forestry students have learned 3 methods of carbon accounting, and I will briefly go over those for those of you not familiar with those. So the first is periodic and direct measurements of carbon in the forest stock. So we simply take the dry weight of tree biomass and compare those of 2 different points in time. Then we have inventory-based carbon accounting models. This is basically computer models it's used as a tool to create some predictions about carbon effluxes mostly. And there's the third one, direct carbon flux measurements, which is really cool. It's when you measure flows of carbon directly with sensors, for example, eddy covariance, correlation, and really all about carbon exchange, really at the molecular level. Cost-effective carbon accounting of carbon stocks will typically combine all of these 3 methods, and often combine these with remote sensing, GIS, all the things we just heard about, so geographic imagery. In order to do this effectively, we really need to increase our transparency about all this geographic imagery data. And this is where transparency comes in. IFSA really encourages a greater transparency of academic knowledge, GIS data, and of course exchange of resources of all these techniques needed. We all understand that getting an accurate and reliable estimation of the carbon stocks is necessary in order to create good predictions and policies for future climate change management. So we really encourage greater transparency, and we believe involvement of the youth is one way to go about it. And exchange of knowledge should be the guiding principle in forest science. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to, how do we get this one going? There we go, awesome. I know, Naomi, too, that in your research you do some work with soil carbon, which I thought might be fun to speak about, because I know we've heard a lot about forests today, and a very important piece of the forest is soil and where those trees grow from.
So traditionally, when you think about the carbon sequestering potential of a forest, you think about the trees and their stems and their leaves. But actually, we're starting to understand more and more the importance of carbon in the soil, especially with the root systems and associated microbiota. This is something that we also increasingly recently started to understand. And also there, the exchange of knowledge is really important. We can create more predictions about, for example, the increased respiration of soil microbiota by exchanging data sets and having meta-analyses and really encourage those. So that's indeed like an increasing, really cool field in the science.
Wonderful, thank you. So I definitely would love to open it up to our audience. I know that there's a wealth of knowledge as well from everybody here sitting down. If you want to feel like stretching your legs, stretching your mind a little bit, you've been taking some great notes. If anybody feels like coming up to the mic and asking any questions of our panelists, please feel free at any moment to come up. If you're feeling sort of more introverted, we still have these notes where you're welcome to write something down in a more quiet way. Otherwise, I'll probably just engage in a discussion, but please do feel free to come up to the mic at any point. One of the things that I heard sort of throughout a number of your guys' presentations was the nature of uncertainty in carbon accounting. And I know that there's a good deal of uncertainty as well in soil carbon accounting. And I really appreciated what you said, Jono, in terms of the role that can have for transparency and accountability for governments with the implementation of the Paris Agreement. I'm wondering if anybody on the panel might be able to speak to possible solutions for those uncertainties in MRV as we think about implementing the Paris Rulebook.
Well, I think, when I talk about uncertainty, I think there is so much uncertainty in everything. But in terms of soil, I think we need more measurements. That's why we don't know what's going on. And also, I think we are lacking the modeling capabilities as well. So we have to enhance both. And I feel that going from the emission factor perspective might be a little bit limited because we have such a diverse array of factors, variables that are related to emissions. And I just wonder if there is a better bottom-up approach that we could take to look into the emissions to reduce the emissions uncertainty. That's my take.
Awesome. One of the other things that I heard sort of across the presentations that I was glad to see was, I know Gao Jingping, you had talked about that some of the terrestrial carbon accounting classes are not necessarily some of the most popular classes. And I know also it was mentioned about how do we communicate this stuff? Like how do we do climate change communications? And I'm wondering if we think that if these classes might be more appealing, if it were a communications issue, or is it a demand issue? Do we need to incite more demand from the students? Or is it that we need to communicate the science better or communicate the importance of doing accounting? I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on that.
We have think a lot about our courses. We aim our students at the technicians from our forestry planning academy. They have the basic techniques such as investigation and techniques. So they have good foundation to study this. So we not only study the basic theories, we will teach them how to practice in their work. That's all.
Awesome. And Ari, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that, or any of the other panelists? Please feel free to chime in at any point as well. These questions are open.
Sorry, in terms of communication?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the communication piece is so important, and there's a cultural difference, there is language difference, and there is I think scientific perception difference in different countries as well. So like it's a very multifaceted, I think, problem. And in the U.S. there is a problem about a lot of people not believing in climate change as well. So I do think that it would be wonderful if there was a way to be able to communicate it better, so that there is going to be a capacity building from that aspect, not just to, I think among the scientists, that's a really big need. We know the science, but how can we communicate that to the public? I think that's something we need to learn better.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you. That's something that I work on myself. I work at the Yale program for climate change communication. So full disclosure, I think that's why I'm interested in that particular question. I think it's really important that, you know, the IPCC puts out these amazing reports, and man, even as a master's student, it can take 30 minutes to look at one chart and figure out the error bars on that, right? So it is really important to figure out how we can do that more effectively and concisely and in a way that appeals to lots of different demographics and cultures, and in a way that moves people to act. So I'm really glad that a couple of you guys touched on that. Yay, we have a question from the audience.
Hello, just checking, okay. My name is Jennifer. Thank you for participating in the panel. I have a comment and a question specifically for Joseph. I thought it was interesting that you are really excited about having young people represent your country and work towards understanding greenhouse gas in your peatlands, because I think that the median age in the continent of Africa is 19.4 years, so it's definitely important to engage in young people in your country. So my question is, you have such great preservation skills within your country. Do you share these types of skills with other people who have countries that have issues with illegal logging for charcoal and cook fires in least developed countries, or just in general?
Thank you. I didn't recall your name. Jen? Geneva? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, you know, I think one of the most important things when you do something good is to share it. If you don't share, it's useless. Yeah. And also, if we are good in what we do, just because we have learned it from the others, many of our good experience have been gained thanks to this cooperation with other institutes, other countries, other experts. So we are not close. Our problem is that we don't have a way we keep data. We don't have a repository. And I think one of the challenge we are facing is to have a repository, a database, where we can store information, we can collect data, so everybody can use it. For example, now, for what we have done so far, I cannot tell you, okay, go on this specific area, use the website, go in this library, you will find everything. But you can get this information using maybe FAO database. So yes, what we have done so far is available for, we share it. One of the best way to learn about our experience is to come and visit us.
Awesome.
And you are warmly welcome you.
Wonderful.
Hello, my name is Astrid. I'm with the GIZ. And I'm actually not very familiar with the land use sector, but I'm familiar with the water sector. And what we're experiencing with the water sector in the IPCC, actually, the emissions are disaggregated across a number of different sectors, such as industry, electricity, waste. So when we're working with in the countries. We're working in 4 countries with the ministries. Then they're saying, oh, you know, I don't care about the energy emissions because actually, for me, it's only the wastewater, for example. So what I want to raise is that there is sometimes a challenge. We're thinking about Paris Agreement and commitment, but when you're breaking it down to these sectors, it doesn't match up really how, you know, to kind of like set a target, because really you have to combine both. So one question that I have is, do you have any similar, you know, experiences or like within the land use sector? And if so, what would you recommend? And then the other question is, we have actually developed a tool that does a pretty good carbon footprint for the water sector based on the Ipcc methodology, and then we're getting sometimes into the system boundaries. So if you can talk to the 2 points, system boundaries and targets.
I can try that one. Astrid, it's interesting to hear about the water stuff and how it kind of goes across different sectors. Everything the IPCC does is it forces you into a box. Like, that's just how greenhouse gas accounting works. You have to make a decision where you draw the boundary and how you classify different things so that you can come up with the emission factors and the activity data. So when you talk about the system boundaries, I guess, you know, the IPCC doesn't have a sector for water, but we're hearing a lot about some of the water, energy, and climate interactions. And so there's no good, I don't have a single answer for you, but the only thing I would encourage you to think about, especially if you're working in multiple countries, would be to, the approach that we found worked well, if you're looking at building capacity around water and greenhouse gases, is to, you know, do 2 things. First of all, make it really comprehensive. Don't let those boxes determine how you're going to approach capacity building. And second, just make sure that for each country that you're working in, presumably to build capacity, I wasn't quite sure of that, but I assume that's your starting point. You know, it's just to make sure you ask them, how are you reporting water already under your national communications, whether it's the energy using water or whether it's the land use in the agricultural sector, and then to build your courses just in a really comprehensive manner around water. So the short answer is, don't let the guidelines tell you how to teach, but just go at the water issue in a really comprehensive way that when you build your training, make sure you're really asking government how it can be useful, not just for reporting, but for actually managing water. So that's sort of a quick answer.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jono. That sort of leads me into another segue of how, and a number of you guys touched on this, but how can these programs, these partnerships be run in a way, I don't know if I lost you, that is helpful and useful to inform policy, right? It's great to train people, it's great to learn the science and to geek out. I'm a big fan of that. I do look at IPCC charts for 20 minutes, guilty. But how can these, when we think broadly about building these partnerships and these curriculum, how can it be done in a way that can dovetail and match well to policies? And if anybody on the panel or if anybody in the audience has struggled with that, or if they have concrete examples of that or ways they've overcome it.
Gao, do you want to answer how can the academic partnerships change policy? Like, how do you think the forest inventories and the carbon measurements that AFIP does would change the 5-year plan in China? Or like, what is that sort of the question?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
The 5-year plan, like, how would the work of AFIP actually change, if you do the monitoring, how does it change China's policy? What's the connection?
China's policy. In the past years, China make product industry and logging many wood. Now China is turn to to protect forests. From in China has forbidden no more forests logging in key forest areas in China. Our new 5 plan has made our contributions to Paris agreements. About the key forest key is our forest stock will up to for the number I couldn't remember but all in all, China now is very emphasis on economical forests structure and forest preservation. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. I think we're going to take one from the audience.
Thank you so much, guys, for presenting. I have a question for John. You were talking about the IPCC reports, and they're very technical. And so how do you see the role of civil society relating to tracking emissions and looking at transparency, given that the average person might not be able to understand the reports or the requirements? Thank you.
That's a great question. What was your name again? Mora. I mean, one of the trends you see happening now that we have the Paris Agreement in place is we're trying to devolve the action and the reporting down to states and provinces and cities and universities and corporations. So I think that question, like, how can you get civil society engaged in greenhouse gas accounting that is the fundamental question. Like the question you asked is the same question I posed at the very beginning. How can we build a professional workforce that is not just the national inventory people, not just the Joseph writing a report and submitting it to the UN and having the UN do a very cursory look at it, but how do you get the training down into the hands of people working in real businesses or working in real corporations or real cities? You see a lot of pledges out there, Maura. You'll hear a lot now that the U.S. has said it's going to pull out of the Paris Agreement that, there's a huge initiative called We're Still In. And that's going to be one of the big themes of the COP this year is that lots of states and cities and corporations are going to do their part to meet the Paris Agreement, which is wonderful. That's great. It's great news that there's a lot of American institutions that want to support Paris. But when you ask them, are they measuring their current baselines and are they setting targets and are they actually credibly measuring whether they're meeting their targets? The short story is they're just talking about that right now. They haven't actually taken that step. So it's a great question. I don't think there's a single answer, but how do you sort of democratize the greenhouse gas accounting? I'm sure anyone on this panel can answer that. I think one of the key things is you really have to incentivize it. So a lot of the courses that we do, we really try to make it clear that if you get more training, you can often get a better job. There are a lot of employment opportunities and areas where you can develop new positions within your company or within your country if you get more training. So that's a really big, I think that's going to be the big motivator to get more people at the subnational level to do the reporting. But I'll let other people or anyone from the audience answer that too. But I'd love, Joseph, your thoughts, or if you guys have any other thoughts about how you get people other than the national governments doing the reporting. It's a great question.
It's always difficult to say how civil society can be engaged in one topic or one matter. For example, the problem is before they come in action, we have to provide them with some information, some data. It's why I said that when we collect data, we make inventories. It have to be used for our indoor interests first, before applying using that data just because we want to be in compliance with international requirements. If we don't have a clear view about our own emission, for example, or if we don't make an inventory for our own use, we cannot give opportunity to social society to say, okay, they have to be used like watchguard, in fact. And for that, data have to be available for everybody. First, for Indo people. If we don't have that, if you use that only to publish on the UNFCCC website, so I don't think they will be that accurate, because they will be collecting using international format, which is not really understandable locally in our countries. We have to build new methodology for collecting data for internal use, and also that methodology have to be in compliance with the international standards. So one of the biggest problems our civil society have in, I say in Congo, not in Africa, because every country is different from the other, is that we collect data, we send abroad. We collect information, we send because the World Bank need it, because UNFCCC need it, not because we need it to monitor our own system, our own way of living, for example, or to make some forecast. So the way we can be involved in that is, okay, first we have to give them access to that data, and also support. That question, it's about governance too, because if nobody is allowed to speak, we can have everything here. We say one word, we would go to jail. So first of all, but once we have access to data, we can even use another way. We can use Twitter, we can use WhatsApp, we can use Facebook to say, okay, you said that. For example, I said that Congo has now 5 cemetery plants, but nobody knows that from 2014 and now, our emissions have grown in the industrial sector. We have to measure it. That once we measure, maybe we have some NGO saying, "Oh, look, we are not as clean as we said before." We have to do that. Why are not we doing it? Maybe I can say that we don't know how to measure it. That's a good excuse, but we have to come out. When we do that, we have a clear figure between what we was before and where we are now. Maybe someone has to say, okay, that's not normal. We have to use another method of developing our industry. So I think this, providing data will help the civil society to be more reactive.
Awesome, thank you. So I know that we've got some friends in the audience here that I'd love to hear from about if they have any experience with MRV academic programs in their home countries.
Sorry, can I just add one
Yes,
thing?
please.
Yeah, about the disaggregate emissions, I just wanted to mention that we find that disaggregated emissions have so much more uncertainty than the national level. And so I think it's so much more important to be looking at that. And then just like the transparency was mentioned, that's so important. And active learning was also mentioned. I think more discussion and then having a place where we can actually talk about how it's measured or how it's calculated would be really important. And I think the scientists and everybody, the policymakers, have to be more open about how they come to that, and then if they should change it. I think that has to be the ongoing process, and emission factor cannot be just staying constant.
Absolutely. One of the things I was going to put out there that I was thinking in terms of how do you incentivize greenhouse gas accounting is I know that Article 6 of the Paris Agreement provides for parties to be able to use internationally transferred mitigation outcomes or market measures as a way to meet their climate mitigation targets as well. And so I know that perhaps, as you were saying, like if there were more people in the private sector that had this type of training, that's also a way that might be a way to incentivize this type of academic training. And if anybody wants to speak on that, they're welcome as well. But I know we've also got some questions. We'll go here and then here.
Thank you very much, speakers. My name is William from Ghana. I'm really interested in the greenhouse accounting because today is my first time of hearing it. My background is finance, and I think it's a very good topic that we should all try and learn and see how best we can be more practical in it. Supplying information to you, I know UNITA and UNCC learning. They are doing collaboration in terms of this climate change issue. So they've engaged the national or other countries to incorporate the climate change issue into their educational curriculum, which I'm privileged to be part of the team. So I would suggest that we get in contact with the UNCC learning as well as UNITA and see how best we can incorporate this carbon accounting into it, because that is what they are doing now. In currently Ghana, there's a new curriculum reform which we are incorporating the climate change, the NDCs, into the curriculum from junior level to the higher level. So we'll be doing a lot of campaign on it. So hearing this, coming to read more about it, I think I can take advantage to create more awareness in Ghana for people to know that this is what is coming. They should prepare for it. Thank you.
Thanks, William. Got one more question over here. Got a couple.
So full disclosure, I work with one of the people on the panel, which is why I'm carrying a camera right now. This is a question for any and all of the presenters, and I think it's a little bit related to the question of data aggregation. But we've talked primarily about forest and other land use accounting or terrestrial carbon accounting. And I guess my question would be, what are aspects of terrestrial carbon accounting training or capacity building that are specific to that field? And then what are aspects that are applicable in terms of how you teach it? What are aspects that are applicable to other sectors for greenhouse gas accounting, as well as the emerging fields of MRV for adaptation or MRV for climate finance? So to sort of capture that, the specifics for terrestrial carbon accounting, as well as more generalizable lessons learned.
Great, thank you.
I can try, and Patrick works for me, full disclosure. So, no, but one of the critical things, that was the title of the side event, right? Or it's how do you take international best practices for teaching and apply them in different countries? Like China has a very different cultural context for teaching than, say, Republic of Congo. So, Patrick, your question, I think, is sort of like, how do we take what we've learned about good teaching practices and terrestrial carbon accounting and apply it to other sectors? And the short answer is a lot of capacity building money has been wasted because they don't invest in the universities, and they don't start from the good faculty that are already there. They often try and come in and sort of impose an expert from outside. How it can relate to adaptation, good teaching practices for adaptation, I don't know. I really don't have a good answer for that. And then for the finance stuff, there's a whole slew of NGOs and other people who are trying to track the financing, and it's just as messy as the greenhouse gas accounting. Different people reporting for support. So that's a great question. I don't know if anyone's teaching how to train people on measuring the support. I don't think I've ever heard of a single course that's being taught in that. So it's a very interesting question.
I'm not sure I will bring some more clarification about a question, but I think that, okay, when it comes to measure support, from my perspective, it's we first have to know what is requested. For many countries, there is a need of for NDC implementation. It's I think the first thing to do is to go for a technical need assessment, and in that TNA, a focus have to be made on the skills needed in order to implement the NDCs. If you don't know what you need to implement NDCs, how do you think we can measure afterward? So, one also, most of the country, or maybe all the developing countries, should go for a new stage of a TNA now, because many have done the TNA before the Paris Agreement. But I think it's more important that to align this technical needs assessment to come out with a technical action plan. So in that TAP, it's okay to implement, for example, some policies in this specific sector. We need to train our young people in this specific area. If you don't have commitment, you don't make some steps, you won't be able to measure. And this is one of the biggest problems our developing country will be facing if we don't take care about the transparency framework. If they neglect what is going now, we have a problem in 5 years' time. You know, it's something very important in transparency now. We have to get involved in. So I think, okay, I've talked too much.
Thank you, Joseph. Do we have one question?
Hello, Carsten Neuer from the German Institute for Economic Research. I don't know much about monitoring, but we've been working quite a bit on policy implementation. And first, we really failed in Europe in the initial stages with the emissions trading system because of the lack of quality data. So I very much appreciate the contribution your work is going to do to implementation of policy. But secondly, my question now, with the Paris Agreement, we've moved away from this international trading and therefore the top-down definition of absolute levels. And it's a lot more about understanding how we make the bend, how policies change the emission level. And therefore, I wonder how your accounting practices are changing, as it is no longer as essential to know the absolute level, but far more important, how much have emissions changed since last year, since 2 years ago? Do you notice that?
Speaking from my experience as a student, I know we're increasingly looking at how to calculate rates and effluxes, mostly fluxes. So we're always looking at carbon as a sort of moving kind of reservoir instead of a very static one. Also, carbon cycling rates are increasing, so therefore it's increasingly important to understand the fluxes, not so much what you say, the absolute values. So I do see that in education becoming more prioritized.
I'll add one thing quickly, Karsten. There's a lot of, you're not the only person to notice that a lot more attention needs to be paid to, what's the word I'm looking for? Quantifying the impacts of policies, right? So there's this sort of time gap where countries make a contribution or pledge a contribution, and then if we wait until that policy plays all the way out, then we're not going to be able to really adjust and bend the curve, as you said. So there is some really interesting work from ICAT. I'm not sure if you're aware of them, but they're trying to develop protocols for actually understanding how policies can be quantified. And other people in the room and definitely other people at the conference may know more about that. But I think it's a super interesting question. How can we sort of use the accounting on policies to push policies to go faster? So that was just a quick reaction.
So one reaction I have, I think combining both your question and then the previous question, I think it's very important to think about how the next generation can move in. And so one way probably is to think about how the classes in the developed countries could be combined with the developing countries' students so that they could be working on the project together to potentially quantify emissions or something like that, so that there could be, like, developed countries, people could learn more about how adaptation might work, and then maybe we could give some insights on the potential mitigation. I think that's something I would potentially like to work on, and then I think there needs more investment in that kind of approach for the future.
Wonderful. Thanks, you guys. We are wrapping up our time together, which has been lovely, and we so appreciate your participation and your questions and your thought and your attendance here. I would also like to thank our panelists for speaking with us and being with us today. Thank you. And just lastly, I'd like to say at our booth, for the GHGMI booth, we have a fun quiz on transparency and greenhouse gas accounting, and you can win some stickers and prizes and stuff. So come by and see us. Otherwise, please feel free to come up and chat with our panelists. Thanks so much.